So my name is Walt Ray. I'm the Chattahoochee Program Director for the Trust for Public Land. The Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit organization. We are nationwide. We have about 30 offices across the country and employ about 300 people dedicated to our Land for People mission. And basically what that means is we are trying to get land put into public's hands for people to enjoy. So think about your state parks, your local parks, national parks. We are very good at buying that land, getting it into the public's hands for public use. Over the past 50 years, we have protected as an organization about 3 million acres of land for people, and again in your state parks, local parks, and national parks. In Georgia, we've done a lot of work. We really actually focused. We opened the Georgia office really to focus on protecting the banks of the Chattahoochee. We opened the Georgia office 30 years ago, and there were a lot of development pressures along the river, and we came in with a quite a little nest egg and a war chest, and we started protecting land along the river. And since then, we've protected about 18,000 acres and 80 miles of riverfront between Helen, Georgia, and Columbus, Georgia. And then as the organization has evolved, we've really started to think more about how do people use the land. How do, if we're protecting all this land, is it serving the communities that it should? Is it or do we have equitable approaches? Are we approaching the protection equitably across the region and across the state and across the country? And how do people want to use this land exactly? So along the Chattahoochee River, we actually focused in on a 100-mile segment. Buford Dam, of course, is up here in the north. The Chattahoochee River runs through 19 metro Atlanta cities and 7 counties. And of course, Atlanta being right in the middle. Down to Chattahoochee Bend State Park. So that is a 100-mile long corridor that we committed to developing a plan. How do people want to use the river? And let me just ask a question. Show of hand. Well, I guess when is the last time? Think about when is the last time you saw the Chattahoochee River? Did anyone see it today? Really? Someone saw it today. How did you see it today? Yeah, you drove by it. How many people have not seen the river in at least a month? A year? Do you know what the river looks like? Who does not know what the river looks like? And it's a fair question. There we go. Well, we have a way of hand. I will say I was hired 4 years ago, and I started telling my friends and family and neighbors, like I'm the new Chattahoochee Program Director at the Trust for Public Land, and I got 3 very common reactions, which kind of surprised me actually. The first most kind of common reaction was like the Chattahoochee River, like, ew, like that's gross. Why would anyone want to be at the Chattahoochee? Fair enough. It has deserved that. I mean, it's not true anymore. There's been a lot of progress, but 30 years ago that was certainly true, and even recently that was true. The second most common question I got was Chattahoochee. That's a river, isn't it? Is it a river? It's in Georgia, isn't it? And what does the river look like? I've never what does the river look like, or where is the Chattahoochee? And then kind of the third kind of most common question was, or a comment was, they would start singing the song, the Alan Jackson song, "Way Down Yonder on the Chattahoochee." Way down yonder on the Chattahoochee was a very common response I would get when I would say the word Chattahoochee. And I actually have several people who actually believe that Chattahoochee was fictional, that Alan Jackson made up the word Chattahoochee because it rhymed with hoochie coochie. It was the other way around, for the record. But the Chattahoochee River, many of us recognize as a shared cultural resource, an ecological resource that does run for about 485 miles through the state of Georgia, Florida. It does provide drinking water for about 4 million people, including here. I believe the beer made here is made out of Chattahoochee water as a starting point. And if you're drinking Coke products, you're drinking a lot of Chattahoochee. And of course, your tap water. Most of our tap water is Chattahoochee as well. So an amazing shared resource. As a region, I will say I've noticed we've done a very good job over the past generations of hiding the river. How we hid it behind, sort of in the northern suburbs, we hid it behind gated communities and private backyards and golf courses, and fenced it off. We hid it behind airports, railroad tracks, industrial complexes like this one. This one is not on the river, but there are many like this on the river. We've hid it behind farms and barbed wire fences, and there's so many signs. I cannot tell. I mean, I've lost count of how many signs I see. The "Do not approach here." You know, this is areas off limits, but like the river, I know is over there because I'm looking at my phone. Like, well, I know the river's over there, but there's all these signs saying and fences saying stay away. So as a region, we don't have a relationship with with our river the way that a lot of regions do with their river, and so I like to say that my job is to introduce the region to its river, and also to kind of reintroduce the river to its region. And so, with that in mind, in 2018, we launched a 2-year study. It was a $1.5 million budget. We hired a huge team of very capable people to help the region consider what its relationship to the river should be. And this was a project, this was a collaborative project. I'm with the Trust for Public Land, but the ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission, did fund quite a big chunk of the study, and the match, the local match, was paid equally by the Trust for Public Land, Cobb County, and the City of Atlanta. And so together we embarked on this journey, and the very first thing we did was we established the Chattahoochee Working Group. So the Chattahoochee Working Group is is a sort of a loose collaboration of organizations, so cities, counties, state, local, federal agencies who have an interest in the river, but also any nonprofit organization with an interest in the river is welcome on the Chattahoochee Working Group. And we convene this group to really have a public consensus, have a public dialogue about what our priorities are with the Chattahoochee as a region, and to share perspectives. You know, we had the environmentalists who would like, I want to keep the water clean, I want to protect the birds, I want to use it as a migratory, I mean, birds use it as a migratory pathway, don't they? So let's not mess that up. And then we have people who want to, like, we want sports fields and breweries and patios and, you know, pavement, like plazas. I'm like, okay, so we had everybody in the same boat for two, and the Chattahoochee Working Group continues to this day. We did a lot of public engagement, some of it like this, some of it more one-on-ones. We did lots and lots of public forums and stakeholder meetings. And that process was very useful because it helped us really establish 4 big goals. Well, it helped us understand what the Chattahoochee RiverLands was, like what was our goal. Our goal, we realized early, was we wanted to have a greenway. One side of the river, a greenway trail, so think of the Silver Comet Trail or the Beltline or the Big Creek Greenway, you know, paved path, one side of the river or the other, or both. We weren't sure at the time, but we just knew that we wanted a connective tissue that would serve as a spine for the region. We also wanted to make sure that we had a blue way, and of course we didn't have to decide where the blue way was. The river was the blue way. The questions became, how do we access the blue way? How do people want to get to the river, get in the river? What activities do you want to do along the way? Some of the conversations we had, we learned about people want to be able to paddle up to campsites. People wanted to be able to picnic. I will say that a lot of the people in the northern suburbs were begging for restrooms because they were tired of finding toilet paper in their azalea bushes. Fair enough. If you're in a paddle, I mean, you're paddling and nature calls, you got to figure that out. So let's help people figure out where to do these kinds of things and picnic. And then more access. We also realized the access was very inequitable. To the north, in the northern suburbs, we had quite a bit of pretty good access: boat ramps, kayak launches, overlooks. We had a lot of, but really from Peachtree Creek south, they're very sparse and they're very hard to get to. And a lot of times there might be a boat ramp that has been gated for 20 years and due to security concerns or whatever. We also learned early that the Chattahoochee RiverLands, we needed to include what we called tributary trails. How do you get people who live, 1 million people live within 3 miles of this section of the river. How do you get those people from where they live and work to where we hope that they'll play? So how do you puncture that veil that we have built along the river, get behind the subdivisions, get behind the office complexes and the golf courses, and get behind the airports and things like this. So we call those tributary trails. So think about the Big Creek Greenway, Proctor Creek Greenway in Atlanta. The Silver Comet Trail goes almost to the river, but how many rooftops does the Silver Comet Trail pass? I mean, tens of thousands. So how do we get those people from where they are to where we would love for them to be? And then we realized that the combination of the Greenway Trail, the Blueway Trail, and the tributary trails, and then the destinations that they would inevitably create, is what we wanted to define as the Chattahoochee RiverLands. And furthermore, we went one step further. We made 4 kind of big overarching guidelines. So as we were designing as we were testing theories, as we were proposing alignments for the potential trail, we could weigh our success against these 4 criteria. The first was a safe connective corridor. So how do you make the Greenway Trail and the Blueway Trail and these tributary trails, how do you make them safe? From a public safety standpoint, where you feel safe and you feel like they're accessible to you and that you're not going to get injured or you won't witness crime along the way. But also when when the river rises quickly, let's not put people in danger, and let's make it as connective and as intuitive to use as possible, so that people aren't getting lost and they feel welcome to be there. The second big goal was really about our equity. We wanted to make sure that everyone felt welcome at the Chattahoochee RiverLands, no matter your age, your background, your ethnicity, your religious beliefs, your abilities, your disabilities, let's find, or your interests. If you want to meet at the RiverLands, we want you there. We want you to feel welcome. We want you to find something to enjoy about the RiverLands and to bring your friends and family. We also recognize the river's importance as the ecological function that it provides for this region. So we call the goal the ecological refuge for the region, and that of course talks about, as we bring more people to the river's edge and to the river's banks, let's not do so at the cost of conservation. So let's make sure that the birds and the butterflies and the wildlife and the water quality win as we introduce more and more people to the river and its banks. And then the fourth big goal was we wanted to make sure that we had a plan that was bold enough and simple enough that it inspired a generation to build it. And that future generations will still love whatever we're building today, and will continue to foster it, use it well, care for it, let it evolve, let it reflect whatever the future needs will be. And then we use those goals to establish a 100-mile-long Greenway Trail, and this is what it looks like. This is only 7 miles, I believe, but there's 100 miles of this, and you can see here's the river. And then it proposes a Greenway Trail, which is indicated by these yellow lines. The tributary trails indicated by these yellow lines with arrows, and then boat ramps, parks, kayak launches, picnic areas, all of the amenities. And we proposed where these would be for the 100-mile segment. And again, we were working with stakeholders, city representatives, county representatives, neighborhoods, interested individuals. Just as many people as we could to go through this process, and this process really took about 2 years. And this is what we also started thinking, like, what does that yellow line? I mean, that yellow line's great, and it's exciting that we did find a way to stitch together these 19 cities and 7 counties on one continuous network of trails. We were actually kind of I was impressed with the work that the team did to sort of figure out that alignment and how that could all work. The question then became, that yellow line is great, but what does it start to look like? So we started using 3 different sites along the river, one in Sugar Hill, one in Atlanta, and one in the city of Chattahoochee Hills, to kind of tease out, what does that yellow line look like? What is it? How do those goals resolve themselves on the land through a trail on real sites? So this was the Sugar Hill Greenway, this was the Proctor Creek Trail Extension, and that was our quick vision for Chattahoochee RiverLands Park in the city of Chattahoochee Hills. I will say we also took another idea. We took a 1.7-mile section. So the river, of course, is here. Atlanta is on this side, and Cobb County is on this side. Donnelly Hollowell becomes Veterans Memorial in Cobb County, and then ML King becomes Mapleton Parkway, also in Cobb County. So this section between, the county already owned all this. They own about 140 acres, and their sewers run through there. And I will say, I never really thought that my career would devolve to the place where I was so excited to find sewers. But I will say sewers have become one of my best friends, and I'll show you why in a minute. But they're typically flat. Sewer lines don't usually take up a lot of ground. They're usually pretty flat. They're already cleared. They don't let trees grow on sewers. So they keep them mown. So putting a trail down a sewer line is actually fairly easy. So if I can find a sewer line, I'm pretty excited and at the promise of a trail that can be built there. And so this property has the sewer line, and it's actually gorgeous. It's big huge trees, an opening, and I call it the cathedral because the trees come up over and touch, and it really does feel like a majestic space. just hidden back there somewhere that no one's, people haven't been there for a very, very, very long time. All told, we proposed 125 miles of Greenway Trail, because sometimes it is on both sides of the river. We proposed 25 river crossings. We heard a lot of communities say, like, I can see my neighbors across the river, but it's a 25-minute ride to get to their house. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we could just cross the river? So we really built in a lot of river crossings. We also talked about, we proposed 44 tributary trails, 25 trailheads, 42 water access points, and all told, 1 million people live within a 3-mile or a 15-minute bike ride. And of course, we already mentioned the 19 cities. We also did concentrate on 4 environmental justice target areas, so areas that do suffer from lack of investment. We put together some policies to help them not get lost in this big effort. And you can look it all up at ChattahoocheeRiverLands.com. You can learn all about every single detail of the process is for public consumption. All of the meetings are documented, and also the proposals. You can zoom in on an interactive map, and you can trace the entire route down to the square foot. So the Trust for Public Land, as we finished up the planning process and moved towards implementation, we realized that we would have a complex role to play. We don't own the land. We don't want to own land. We don't, I don't work for one of the cities or the counties or the state. I'm an advocate. I can't make anyone do anything. I can only ask and petition and encourage. So, and that's fine. I don't want more than that. That's a good role for me. So we can champion. We can remain in contact with all these partners who helped to develop the vision, the 19 cities and 7 counties, and this coalition of partners that we built that we call the Chattahoochee Working Group. So we continue to facilitate that discussion. We can lead projects. The Trust for Public, we are very good at raising philanthropic funds. We will tap foundations and individuals with high wealth, and we are very good at raising money in that way. And then we can also encourage our local partners to apply for grants that we cannot apply for. So they can apply for, Atlanta Regional Commission offers transportation grants. I can't apply for them, but I can write your application for you, and then you can submit it, and then you can get $4 million, and we can help you figure out how to spend that on the implementation. So we can partner in that way. And then sometimes we can really advise. So city of Johns Creek, city of Peachtree Corners, city of Chattahoochee Hills, looking to implement parts of their vision. We can help ensure that sort of thread of consistency, and that those 4 big goals that we agreed to as a region are always upheld and reflected in projects that are built in this massive vision. And then the other thing is we can actually lead projects. So in this case, and the map is here, and I have the handouts here. We wanted to build something. Again, with fundraising. I'm a landscape architect and have built many large projects across the region over my career. We do know how to build high quality parks and amenities. So we started looking in the Atlanta and COBB area because there were so many proposed tributary trails. The main stem greenway was proposed for both sides of the river, and just so much effort, and also like a lot of rooftops. I mean, look at all the people who live, but here, like I said, like there's an airport, there's an industrial complex, another industrial complex, a former, an abandoned, that's Chattahoochee Brick, that's a former factory, a tank farm, a neighborhood, look, yay, we have some people, and then a landfill. And then you see how far the people, but lots of rooftops all over here, lots of people living here. The barrier that is very common along the river. Again, the barrier, this is industrial. Actually, that's all industrial. That's all industrial. And then lots of rooftops, right? So this was sort of endemic of the condition along the Chattahoochee River that a lot in the region face. And so we started looking, if we're going to build a project, what should we build? We wanted to demonstrate the potential and the power of the Chattahoochee RiverLands vision. We wanted to demonstrate how do you let those 4 big goals we talked about, how do those articulate themselves in a real world project that people can walk on and enjoy, and it becomes part of their daily lives, improves their public health, improves the perception of their community, improves the condition of the environment, and improves the ecological function. of the river and its banks. So we narrowed in on the pilot project site that we had talked about, whether we took a closer look at the Cobb County already owned. But while we were biting off a bite of this apple to build, I didn't really want to go from nowhere to nowhere. So this is Maxim Crane. This is a large industrial site. And the pilot project site really went from Maxim Crane through the woods to Mapleton Parkway. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to add a bookend down here. So this is what's proposed, a regional trailhead and a boat ramp. And the county owns this 16 acres. So we want to build a regional trailhead here, 2.7 miles of trail, get through that industrial area up to Riverview Landing, which is here, and then actually Proctor Creek in Atlanta ends right, there's I-285. So Proctor Creek, so we wanted to do really from Riverview Landing, which has a barbecue joint, it's got a coffee shop, it's got a brewery, it's got about 300 apartments, and they're building 2 new phases as we speak. So lots of people, like a nice bookend, lots of businesses, lots of things to do in a park. 2.7 miles to the regional trailhead is what we call the Riverlands Showcase, where we've partnered with the Cobb County, the City of Smyrna, the Trust for Public Land, and others, but we will lead the design and construction on this demonstration project. We also included the tributary trail proposed in Cobb County's plans, and also as a Riverlands tributary trail along Mapleton Parkway that goes to the Silver Comet Trail. So that would connect right into this project as well. Again, to demonstrate the power of connecting these communities together and bringing humans to the river's banks, but also to each other. And so as we had scoped it in the original study, there's an proposed educational nook, and Nickajack Creek runs also to the Silver Comet Trail, and is a beautiful tributary to the river. We call this COBB Beach. It's a beautiful little beach right here at the corner of where Nickajack Creek comes in. So it's a nice place where, like the Blue Way Trail, those paddling or floating can beach, and then talk to people who are coming on the tributary trail or the main stem Greenway Trail. And so we are actively pursuing this. We think it's about you're going to get sticker shock. It's about a $44 million project all in, with all the parks and the boat ramps and the overlooks and the main stem Greenway Trail and the 4 miles of tributary trail. It's an expensive project. We have committed about $25 million on public funding, so through SPLOST. Cobb County has a really great SPLOST program, and it's been very supportive. I think $17 million came out of the SPLOST, and then the Trust for Public Land, we committed to raising $18 million in philanthropic funds, 18.15. And so we started this in January, and we are about $10.5 million in to our $18.1 million goal. And we feel like we'll reach that goal by the end of summer. So it's a great opportunity to collaborate with several partners and to really build out 2.5 miles of Riverlands. And really the hope is that people will come there and say, like, oh, that's what you mean by Riverlands. Who remembers when the East Side Trail and the Beltline opened? They built the Beltline, 2.5 miles from Piedmont Park through an area that nobody even knew was there to Inman Park. And people went there and said, oh, that's what you mean by Beltline. Yeah, I like it. When am I getting my part of the Beltline? It drove demand. It demonstrated, like, I remember the first time I walked. So I lived near Piedmont Park. I remember walking to Inman Park and thinking, like, it was that close this whole time. And usually when you drove, it was, I think I could walk there as fast as I could drive there. So we wanted to sort of capture that magic. We're like, this is what you mean when you say Riverlands. This is how those 4 big goals are resolved on a real site. And don't you want this in your community? So building advocates. We have also explored, with the county and with the public in the area. We started thinking about, well, how do you reduce user conflicts? So cyclists often complain that pedestrians are in the way and they're too slow and they're sluggish and I can't get around them. And pedestrians will complain the cyclists are going too fast and they almost got mown over. And really cyclists are trying to be respectful of pedestrians and pedestrians are trying to be respectful of cyclists, but it's just a lot, right? And the belt line, the East Side Trail and the belt line, I mean, a lot of people, I've stopped using it because it's just too hard to get through as a pedestrian or as a cyclist. So we started thinking about how do we separate uses. So we're actually talking about separating, wheels and heels. And so for what that's worth, other cities have tried it, some successfully, some not. But these are the kinds of conversations that we're having as we begin to design this yellow line into an actual amenity that we can all love. And then sometimes we have sewer lines running right down the middle. Oh, do you see my sewer line? Do you see my cathedral? I wasn't lying. It's gorgeous. This is painted in, but this is an actual photograph. So do you see why I get excited about sewer lines now? I would say Fulton County has about 12 miles of sewer from the airport straight downstream to, I don't know, pretty far. Camp Creek Parkway area, I think. So again, heels on one side of the sewer line, because you don't build on top of a sewer line because they might have to dig up the sewer line to fix it, and you don't take my trail with it. So the sewer line down the middle, we can do a bioswale here to capture the storm water that is shed from this new pavement. Wheels, heels, and then also we want to make sure that the Riverlands isn't a through, but a to, not just a path, but a place. So think about all the things that you want to do besides walk and run and move along a trail. You want to stop and talk to your friends. You want to stop and check your phone. You need to send an email. I need to return a phone call. I need to update my Insta. I want to sip a cup of coffee. I mean, all that stuff that you do on a trail besides walking. We want to make sure that we're building in those opportunities where people can do that safely, again, and not become a user conflict by standing in the trail, but standing off the trail. And in this case, the river is just, boop, it's right there. So lots of overlooks and lots of people for people to enjoy the river and to really develop a relationship with the river and to learn to love the river and to learn what the Chattahoochee River looks like and where it is and that it's not fictional. A lot of times we will need boardwalks. Again, we want to make sure that we're conserving the ecological function of the wetlands through the area. We also know the banks flood quite often. So how do we get, and we wanted a safe connective corridor. We didn't want a dangerous connective corridor. We want a safe connective corridor. So let's get people up out of the floodplains as much as possible. Yes, the trails will flood from time to time, but let's minimize that risk with things like boardwalks where appropriate, and let's protect the wetlands from all these humans. But then again, even on a boardwalk, which is kind of pricey to build, let's build in those areas for people to just be and not have to move. The place as well as the path, the to as well as the through. And then this is COBB Beach that I was talking about. This is a real photograph. It's not actually quite that pretty, but it is we would build in sort of like bank stabilization that, by the way, you can also sit on. We could build in we could remove the invasive species that kind of clog the banks of the river and replace them with native species that actually birds and wildlife actually need to eat and need for housing, as opposed to just privet and kudzu. We can stabilize the beach, and then so this is Nickajack Creek, and then there's the Chattahoochee River, and then here again we have kayakers and paddlers meeting with people who are walking or jogging or walking their dogs. We also proposed we call this a ramble. So this would not be a main stem greenway trail. We learned a lot of people don't necessarily want to cycle 100 miles, or they don't want to be on a busy kind of thoroughfare. They want to be able to walk their dog like from home. They want it someplace where they can have more sort of community interaction than regional interaction. So we propose this is in the showcase project. This will be a side path. This is a beautiful wetland that's actually there. We have raised $1 million to help restore the ecological function of the wetlands and to return the stormwater that runs off the industrial complexes into the groundwater, into the water, to replenish the water table. And so we'll be correcting the ecological function of the wetlands that has been a little bit degraded over the years through through human interactions or misinteractions. So we'll fix that. We'll do a ramble, as we call it, so a gravel trail. To things like this that draw people in here. They sort of almost invite you to really get down and like touch the grass in the wetlands and look at the frogs and figure out what that peeper, the peeping sound in the spring, that peep peep peep, like go find what's making that sound. It is frogs. but really get off the main path, stop, observe the history, the culture, the ecology of the area, learn about where you are in the region before moving on. I will say I'm very excited about this. We are proposing a camp and paddle trail. One of the most popular sort of activities, like, I want to be able to paddle up to a campsite, and I do want to be able to paddle up to a campsite. I do paddle up to a campsite, but it's not quite legal. Um, but the sign washed away, so I never saw it. So we will, this is the area of the Chattahoochee RiverLands. It's a little bit harder to find. So Peachtree Creek is right here. The Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area starts just at Peachtree Creek, actually, and goes for 48 miles to Buford Dam. But from, in Atlanta and in Cobb County, and this is Peachtree Creek, so standing Peachtree Green Space, so this is sort of Buckhead, and then Six Flags is over here on the Cobb side. This area is very hard to get to. It's very hard to find the river, and so we've proposed a 48-mile, 4-day, 3-night adventure for camping and paddling. We haven't proposed it. The Riverland study proposed it. We've agreed to build it. The Trust for Public Land, we got a grant through the state for about $2.1 million for this $3.5 million project, where we will launch safely at Peachtree Creek. People do, I launch at Peachtree Creek. It is, I will say, it is a scramble down a steep bank. And if you miss that rock that's in the water there, you're going to take a swim, because I've done it. So let's safe connective corridor, not dangerous connective corridor. So where we will build a proper kayak launch here, you will paddle right by the showcase site. You might take out at Nickajack Creek and have a picnic. You might take out at the kayak launch at Riverview Landing and enjoy a beer or a barbecue or a coffee. You will camp your first night at Buzzard's Roost, and here's where I actually do camp here. It is an island in the middle of the river. It's about, I think, 12 acres, and it is a beautiful place to spend a night. It's got a beautiful beach. It is right now, Fulton County owns this. The city of Chattahoochee Hills will own it, we hope, soon. And you'll spend your first night here. And so no restrooms or structures on the island, because it is all in the floodway. So we wouldn't want to build there. But we will have campsites, a fire pit, a floating dock for kayaks to launch from, so you can scramble up the banks. You don't scramble up the banks. You can walk a nice ADA, fully accessible walkway up to the flat part of the island, and then tent platforms. And then you'll paddle again the next day. Down at the city of Chattahoochee Hills has Campbellton Park. There will be restrooms, picnic shelter, tent platforms. We will do a lot of ecological restoration in the park, so removing the invasive species, replacing it with native species that really help with the wildlife and the diversity. We'll do interpretive signage that talks about, this is where you are, and this is what we've done to the land to make it function better for wildlife. And then the same, a new proposed park. The study proposed a park down here, also sort of the southern end of Chattahoochee Hills, the city of Chattahoochee Hills. There's nothing there yet, but we would also offer restroom, picnic shelter, tent platforms. We will restore the ecology, the wildlife, the woodland restoration there as well, and then you would take out a McIntosh Reserve in Carroll County. And we have a 2-year time frame to get this built. So we have the state grant, which demands that we spend all their money within 2 years, and that sounds like a long time to build some fairly simple amenities, but the permitting in this, the regulatory environment along the banks of the river is very strict, which it should be. But everyone up to the Army Corps of Engineers is going to want to review all of our plans and make sure that we're not, creating problems for the banks of the river or for people living downstream, which is fair enough. We welcome the challenge. And then here, so there's the sites. Actually, I didn't realize I had all these, but you can see they're fairly primitive sites. This is where the kayak launch would be at Peachtree. So right now there's a parking. It's really hard to see this one. There's a parking lot up here at standing Peachtree Green Space. This is actually the water intake for the city's water, right there. So just downstream on the river, Peachtree Creek kind of goes up through Buckhead and pretty far. But we would have a proper kayak launch, and a road from the parking lot down, drop off your gear, go park for the night, and then walk back, and then you would launch. Anyways, I don't know if you care to see the sites. This is Buzzard Roost, like I talked about, a proper kayak, a floating dock here for kayaks, campsites, a small mulch path up to the northern end. So sort of two little nodes, and then a lot of ecological restoration on the actual island itself. And then there's the again here. So here's a boat ramp. So this is at Campbellton Park. So here's the Chattahoochee River at the top here. There is an existing boat ramp. We'd be adding the restrooms, picnic shelter, and then scattering sort of a trail along here, and then a host site up in the top of the hill where a host would spend the summer there. And I don't know why I put that one in twice, but that's what we're up to. That is the big vision. I know you guys must have a lot of comments and questions, and I'm happy to do my best to answer those.
Going to say, I like what the city or the state of Georgia has done around Victory Falls, and the hike down over the covered bridge and the falls right there.
Yeah, in Roswell, yeah.
Yeah, then you can go on down to Riverside Drive in Azalea. It's a beautiful area there. And if you don't want to just walk down the roadside, then it does have one of those areas where you can go off on the wooden bill that goes out around the river. Actually, I went down there one time, and I thought I was going down the end and back, but I ended up way down the end of the street, and it added about 1.5 miles to my hike till I got back. But, I mean, if you could do that, what you've done there, farther on down the river, I think that would be terrific. And the other thing I was thinking is if you could add maybe some RV parks into this concept that you have, where people from out of state could come in, park their RVs, and have some kind of facilities, maybe even three facilities that would attract them down into that system. I think a lot of people would be satisfied with that.
Yeah, we definitely like the idea of camping. Camping was a big favorite. It's one of my favorite activities. I will say there's one spot at McIntosh Reserve you can RV camp on the Chattahoochee River, and it's the only place you can spend the night. You can rent a spot to spend the night on the Chattahoochee River in this 100-mile segment. There's not a hotel room for rent anywhere, but there is one campsite, and I would welcome also additional campsites, the RV kind. Yeah.
Nice presentation. My question is regarding climate change and what's going to happen in the future. So, are there any studies that looked at if the river is going to dry in the future, and if that happens, what's going to happen to all of these investment that you guys are doing?
So the Chattahoochee River Keeper has been, they're an environmental nonprofit. They're actually the reason that we are looking at the Chattahoochee River today. When I talk about the Chattahoochee River and like PU, that was really before the Chattahoochee River Keeper did their job, and they're still working very tirelessly. They are very good at cleaning up the river. They care very, very much about the quality and the quantity of the water flowing through the river and its valley. And so they are the watchdog for the Chattahoochee River, and they've done, they are the ones who held the city of Atlanta accountable. The city of Atlanta spent $2 billion cleaning up their overflows of sewage into the river. Not the only offender, but one of the largest ones. So the Chattahoochee River Keeper has been studying the rivers, what the river will be like during climate change, and of course they expect to be flashier, so rise higher, faster, and then lower, and so periods of droughts and periods of extreme rain. So it will be more flexible, we think, more high floods, more low droughts, and how we can respond to that is there are projections. I'm not a climate scientist, but there are projections about how much the floodplain will change as these weather events become more and more dramatic, and our design teams are aware of what those projections are, and we are trying to build outside the floodplain. We will not always be. We will sometimes just have to build right through the floodplain, and yes, just know that floods will come more and more often as climate change becomes more and more dramatic. But how we handle that is we want to build so that we're building things that can flood and are durable enough that when the flood waters recede, you hose it off and you're back in business. So we're trying to build durably, and as responsively as we can. It's complex though, man. And the other thing is we can really try to stabilize the banks a lot better. The banks are very, very susceptible to erosion, and the Chattahoochee River, the waters do run a little bit brown, and that's because really the banks are eroding so quickly because of that those flashy floods. So whatever we can do to stabilize those banks as part of the ecological restoration of the river and its valley would be very, very useful, as climate change makes the river, the waters rise much more quickly.
So you just have so many constituencies interested in what's going on, and there are competitions between them. You know, I've lived in Atlanta a long time and heard about ARC and COBB and the cities. Just, is there any consensus? Is there a resolution between the people that want to save things and want to maybe have it more primitive, and people who want to make sure that it's paved and there's bike paths and boating and all that?
Yeah.
Do you have just some comments about that?
Yeah, so you're asking, I think, about like the consistency of the experience through the 19 cities, right? So some may want dirt trails, some may want concrete or asphalt. So we don't know. We do know that the National Park Service really does prefer. The National Park Service runs the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, and they have about 6,000 acres along the river. They really do prefer gravel trails. They prefer kind of no trails in some cases. When they would allow greenway, they've asked for gravel, and that's fine. I would prefer things that are more durable, because gravel does wash into the river, and it does bring add to the suspended solids, which of course trout really don't deal with well. So I'm advocating for hard surfaces, but we are kicking off this month. The Chattahoochee Working Group, TPL has hired Scape, the team that did the original study for us, to work with the region again and work with the 19 cities and 7 counties to figure out design guidelines. So guidelines, not mandates. Design guidelines where we'll talk about trail surfaces, trail widths. We'll have some deeper discussion about, do we really want to separate heels and wheels? Do we all want to do that? And if you have 19 cities and they all have their own signage, how do you make this feel like a singular experience? So we don't know the answer to that question, but we've all been asking the same question ourselves. So we have kicked off a study, $250,000 for the first section, which will talk about the trail materials and widths and signage. And then the second phase will talk about building archetypes. Like, do we want to establish, maybe there's like a suburban restroom and an urban restroom and a rural restroom building, and could those all sort of be read as one family but still reflect where they are? So we'll look at the architectural. And then the plantings. One way to actually unify is through similar planting styles. So we'd be looking for natives that perform well, that perform the ecological functions that we need, and can we have a palette that we all kind of try to use if we need landscaping, or if we need bank restoration, or if there's an opportunity to stop erosion on a hillside. Here's the 4 or 5 different ways that we think that we can add a common thread. Because you're right, you want a singular experience through all these different jurisdictions, and some want asphalt, some want concrete, and some want rubber, and some want gravel. How do you make it similar? And we are exploring that. We don't know the answer yet. I have some ideas, but we'll learn.
Thank you for the presentation, Walt.
Yeah.
Just from my own personal perspective, like I've been to a lot of the national Chattahoochee National Recreation Area.
Yeah.
And like I really enjoy, I guess, some of the places that are developed, like Powers Island and stuff, where I don't know if it's a natural aspect of how the river flows. You got the shoals.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like more aesthetically pleasing. I don't know if it's because the amount of land they were able to get, where you can get wider trails. Because then I've been down, like tried to explore some of these little small off the path places, but I don't know if it's just the infrastructure there, or is basically my question, is there parts of the river that just really aren't kind of developing in a way that would give the same aesthetic appeal as like bigger sections where the shoals are? And I'm not an expert in all, but I just have noticed like some of the small, when you get down to like South Cobb, it's just, I mean, I like to drive and just kind of see what the potential is, but it seems like the river seems different. I don't know if it looks dirtier, if there's more industry there, or is it just there really are only natural areas from a planning standpoint that are just more aesthetically pleasing, because these are the shows that are helping with the oxygenation in the water and just the
Right.
natural aesthetics.
So during the Riverland study, we really divided the river into the 100-mile study area into three sort of sub areas. One we called the suburban parklands, and where you're describing is there. So the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, but also, um, Gwinnett County has several parks. So does Johns Creek. I mean, it is very pretty in some places, and where you're describing at Powers Island and just upstream, downstream, just very nearby at Cochrane Shoals, the rocks, and then Devil's Racecourse is right there as well. I mean, it is magnificently beautiful in that section, and the Palisades with the big cliffs that people jump off the cliffs. It's not all like that. Yeah, that looks like something out of a Western movie, and the river really does look a little bit more usual, less dramatic in many sections, and that was really just like how the Brevard Fault was formed, right? Some of it was heaved and some of it was opened, and so I don't know the geomorphology that I can explain the geomorphology quite well enough, but some areas are very dramatic, like you're discussing, and some of them really are just like it's just going through. It's pretty straight. It meanders down muddy banks, and it's just kind of a little bit more boring, if you will. And some areas are more dramatic, but we did divide into three sub areas with the suburban parklands that you're talking about, and then sort of like the urban core, which is where the industrial areas are and the airports and that. And it's the power plant, like the Georgia power plant. It's not pretty, but it's kind of dramatic, and being across the river on the trail and looking across at that, and it almost seems like post-apocalyptic in some ways. A very, very different look. And then really south of Atlanta and Cobb County is really, we call it the pastoral countryside, and it is a beautiful flowing river there, and it's a little bit more shoals and a little bit more topography there, but also you're surrounded by farms and private playgrounds of some limited numbers of people with. So it's a very different countryside down there as well. So we really see it as three different distinct regions. And they all do have very much their own flavor.
So Lewis Robinson submitted a question for us, and it's, what are the biggest environmental threats to the river, and what can we do as individuals or at the local and state levels of government that isn't currently being done?
So the threats to the river really are, I mean, global climate change. We don't quite know how that's gonna affect the river, but one of the biggest threats of the river really is pollution. It is the runoff. So historically, we had a lot of point source pollution along the river. So broken sewer pipes, and that's why the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper was formed, was really to sort of clean up that part of the river, and they have been very, very successul really enforcing existing policies. So the EPA has great policies about you're not supposed to pollute the river. I mean, right? And these are acts that are signed by Congress, and we've all agreed to not pollute the river, but doesn't mean that we don't pollute the river. Some of us were still polluting the river even though we weren't supposed to. So sometimes the policies are here. It's really the enforcement of the policies, like the Clean Water Act. And so the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper has done a great job of really becoming the watchdog organization, enforcing policies that are established by the Clean Water Act, and holding polluters accountable and suing and advocating, not always suing, sometimes just advocating, hey, you need to fix this, or helping them figure out how to fix it, or even just identify that it's a problem. So point source pollution has really been mostly, over the past 30 years, has been mostly addressed. It still happens from time to time, but it's not a policy issue. It's a whoops, that pipe was overwhelmed and broke issue. But the nice thing is that there's so much monitoring and testing of water quality now that if there's a problem, a spike in E. coli readings, it's noticed right away. And so it's tracked down, and that organization has done a great job. I will say, human waste was the biggest polluter in the river for generations, really. That has shifted because of this watchdog organization. Now the biggest contributor to pollution in the river is actually dog waste. And so policy is you clean up after your dog. Human behavior isn't always so amenable. And I will say in private backyards, a lot of owners don't clean up their dog waste in their own yard. They might do it like on the public sidewalk or in the park because there are rules about that. But I would say cleaning up your dog waste is a great way to help the river be cleaner for people, because now the current biggest offender really is that non-point pollution, non-point source pollution, water just running into the river from backyards, golf courses, streets, parking lots, rooftops. It all gets washed in there. And so anything that you can do to keep things from washing into the river that shouldn't wash, plastic bottles. There are so many beach balls and basketballs and tennis balls and golf balls floating down the river at any given moment. I mean, it's appalling how many balls there are. Really just being better stewards of your own land and of your parks and of you and your friends and their pets would be a huge help. Other policies, anything you can do to support. Congress has just reauthorized recently the what's it called? The Land and Water Conservation Fund, and this is a fund so drillers, offshore drilling companies contribute sort of like a penalty, like, yes, we're going to take oil out of your shoreline, but here's our contribution to your land and water conservation. And that is about, don't quote me on this, but it's about $800 million a year, I think, goes into that pot, and that is supposed to be used for buying land along waters and protecting it. Anything you can do for land and water conservation, and a lot of that money really gets bled off into earmarks or special projects that have nothing to do with land and water conservation. So as much as you can do to advocate to your elected officials that they are not misspending monies directed for things like land and water conservation and siphoning off funds for pet projects somewhere else, that's always useful. And actually Georgia doesn't have too much problem with that, but some other states really abuse some of those protected funds.
Help me give thanks to Walt Ray for his presentation.
Thanks guys. Thanks for being such a great audience and for asking such great questions.